Hello, everyone. I'm Kristen from Forthright. Welcome to episode 9 of our cyber series. Today, we've assembled a great panel of experts to discuss data governance in the world of Copilot. If you have any questions throughout the episode, please just drop them into the chat and we'll follow up with you. Without further delay, I'm going to hand it over to Steve to kick things off and introduce our panelists.
All right, good morning, gentlemen. I want to thank each of you guys for joining us today. Nizar, our VP of Productivity and Collaboration. We have Heath, our CISO, and Harish, our Data Governance Specialist with us. I've got a lot of questions and conversations that come up with our various clients and in many meetings all around AI technologies and, of course, the big push from Microsoft Copilot. We've all seen many promises from various providers and different companies on how assistive AI tech is going to make us all more productive. And one question that's not really being thoroughly addressed and definitely not well understood is how do we protect our data in a world where AI is having access to all of this data and presenting the results to the various users. Want to get your comment on that. And I don't know, Heath, maybe you wanted to start with that.
Yeah, sure. Well, like you said, there's a lot to unpack when it comes to these assistive AI technologies being used in businesses, right? A lot of that is going to sit on top of your data, and it's going to surface data that you may not want surfaced to users or to certain users. So, for example, say you've got a spreadsheet out there with all your payroll information, and that's just an easy example for everybody. That you might think that only certain users can find that. But there probably was a link set to somebody somewhere along the line to share that data, and that link may have been created so that anyone in the company with the link can access that data. Well, now you've essentially opened that up. That AI engine is going to very quickly and smartly find that information, put it out there. So a lot of times people think, oh, well, that means I need to make my links differently. And I caution people on that. That's not necessarily the case. Links are for sharing data. Data governance with data sensitivity labels, data retention, that's for protecting your data. The two work together, but they're different layers of protection that you really need to be implementing on that. A long time ago, or not so long ago, in many cases, we would put data on a file server and we would put it in folders and we'd create shares and we'd create access lists around those shares and say, Steve has full access to it. Harish only has read-only access to it. Heath, don't let that guy see anything in here, right? But that was great when the data lived in our nice, pretty little walled garden, right? We could protect it. Today's day and age with technologies like SharePoint, OneDrive, and Teams, data lives everywhere, all at the same time. Data gets leaked out to users, to outside users. Maybe it's intentional. I say leak, but maybe it's an intentional share. You're working with a contractor on a big project. What happens when you no longer need that contractor to have access to that data? Well, that's where things like data sensitivity labels, where you go through and label your data, classify it, right? So we talk about data classification, data sensitivity labels. Building your classification is data classification. This is a public. This information can be publicly viewed. This is internal only. This is internal only, highly confidential. This is off the charts. Only two people should ever see this in the entire company, right? And those are the types of labels that you then apply, which then you can put policies to that data. So now, previously, I was talking about the file server. That data was protected by that access list. Now that data, once we've labeled it, it has its own security built into it. So if Steve shares a file with Harish that they're both supposed to be able to see, that's a sensitive, confidential file that they have the right classifications for their users to be able to view that confidential data. But one of them sends it to me and I don't, I can have the file and still not be able to read the data, or only be able to read the data inside the file that is not confidential. For example, maybe social security numbers or payroll information. I can see the list of all the employees, but I can't see the payroll information. Right? And that's how you need to start looking at that, to build out that system. A lot of times that seems like a daunting task to business owners and to businesses out there. It's really about taking one step at a time, right? Let me just share something real quick for this to kind of point this out. So here's your roadmap that you're looking for when you're talking about moving into data classification, data sensitivity, data retention plans. So first step, know your data. Second step, we can start protecting your data. Third step, we can apply data loss prevention rules to that so that we can control what goes out, what comes in, who gets to share what with whom. And then we can move into governing your data and start actually really looking at it as a record system and manage it in a compliant manner.
It sounds like that in order to do that effectively, there'd have to be a defined policy. So in the days of file servers, it was pretty straightforward, right? HR data was only for people of a member of a HR group, and that was it. And if you were going to share that, you had to grab the piece of data you needed and actually email it and send it out, or whatever your policy was. And then we had other protection technologies like DLP to prevent things like that from happening. With 365 and now Copilot having access to all of that data across the organization, you're talking about these controls that you can put into place, but many organizations haven't actually defined what's acceptable. Like, what is the acceptable security policy? And it seems like now the choices are more sophisticated, more complex, more flexible than just, do you have access or not? So what should organizations be doing to prep for that prior to implementing or going live with something like Copilot?
And I'm going to give you a quick answer here. Maybe I'll come back around on the other side. There is a very there's a lot to answer in that question, right? What should we be doing to get ready to do this? In the world of M365, you really should be starting out with, think of a pyramid. Here, let me see if I can put up another little graphic here for you quickly. No, we'll add that. Think of a pyramid, and really when you're building out your systems, data protection, these methods that you're going to do as data protection are the top peak of the pyramid. So you want to lay the foundation with a zero trust foundation. In that you're going to deal with your identity and access management, application protections, device compliance and management, and then you're going to need to move into the next step of threat defense, right? This is where you get deeper into endpoint protection, mail system protections from spam, filtering, spam and phishing, obviously malware, stuff like that. Disk encryption on your workstations. You're going to be reducing your attack surface. This all sounds like a lot, and it is, but this parts can be done relatively quickly if you establish the right program and move through them, right? Then finally, once we're through that zero trust and that threat defense layer, sitting on top of that is the data protection. Now we have all of the mechanisms in place that support that. We can identify the users. We can identify the systems. We can identify who should be able to access what from where and when and how. Now we move into our data protection steps, and that's where you start having to really look at the actual data itself and start building out your classifications or your labels. Your labels are your personification of your classification, right? So I usually recommend to customers, start simple. Do not get complex. The natural thing people want to do is they'll end up with, tons of labels. Don't do that. Start very simple, very broadly. Start with general. This is general data. Anybody in the company can see it. We don't care if it gets shared out with other people. Public. This is data that's specifically meant to be publicly accessible for everybody, right? Including outside users. Then confidential. This should not be shared outside the organization. Then highly confidential. That probably shouldn't be shared outside of a few strategic members of the organization. Leave it at that. And believe, if I did that correctly, those are the defaults that are in the system. I might not have got them exactly right, but they generally give you 4 default labels. And you just got to start defining, what do these mean and how does that apply to my data set? The other piece to this is, don't save your data forever. I know we all have, everybody out there is like, oh, I really need that spreadsheet that someone made in Lotus Symphony in 1989. that I still have on my file server. I'm like, why? It hasn't been accessed in 15 years. You don't need it. You don't need it. Maybe we can archive it offline somewhere for you where a few people have access to get it if they absolutely going to need it. The reality of it is, and depending on regulatory compliance stuff, you generally don't need data more than 7 years. So if you've been in business for 15 years, half of your data is probably inactive and not needed, right? So whittle it down, delete, archive, get your data sets into order, organize them effectively where they should be, and then start applying your labels.
And the data retention policy is a key part of that to be defined too. By the way, your answer was perfect and classic from a CISO perspective. Now, if I take that to a non-technical perspective, Nizar, you work with lots of clients. You've seen the use case of this in practice and when it's not in practice. I don't know if you wanted to share a story or a thought on this, on how it presents itself to the end user.
So exactly what you say, right? That for me, I come from a place where customers are always wanting to do things that make them more productive, that can make them more collaborative. So really removing all these obstacles and hurdles. And CISO is always putting all the hurdles and obstacles in their mind, in the customer's mind. To protect us.
That's the goal.
So that's the goal. So what I'm kind of excited about is really a kind of this new world that we are coming into, where we're using a lot of automated tools, and obviously AI brings together a bunch of algorithms that can take care of a lot of these mundane and routine tasks. So really, at a point where, if you like me to kind of emphasize this on, is we have these two verticals that we have: manufacturing and healthcare. Manufacturing always wants to get things done much faster. Where in the healthcare sector, there's always this thing about being able to comply with all the regulations that are out there. So many of the healthcare organizations, they're struggling to provide access to the medical practitioners, and in that struggle, there's a large bureaucracy sometimes, and you want to be able to remove these hurdles. So I'm kind of excited on that, and I think Harish probably can kind of shed some light in terms of all the tools that are available. For
I was actually going to get to that too. I think that sets up the next part of the conversation, because we've talked about the importance of data governance. It's interesting how different organizations have different requirements, whether it's compliance driven or it's efficiency. Manufacturing is very concerned about their IP getting out, for example. And so while they may or may not have compliance requirements, they're going to have internal requirements. Everyone cares about data in a different way, depending on what their industry is. But at the end of the day, it now comes down to, how do we execute on this? So we have this framework that Heath laid out on some essentially basic things that we have to start with. They sound basic anyways, and they can get complex. There's lots of different tools that we can use. Harish, how does somebody go about actually implementing data governance inside their 365 tenant, and also protecting themselves from Copilot inadvertently sharing data that is not intentional to be out to the general public?
So as Heath rightly mentioned, the main step in governing a data is understanding what data is important for you. Sometimes you are typing the data or working with the data, and you might not even know that this data is important for me. That is where your data classification or auto labeling comes into process, wherein you use sensitivity label to understand which data is important for me, right? So that's the first step, to know which data is important for me. You can use PII information like SSN, credit card information, routing numbers, these kind of things, right? And then comes the part wherein you encrypt the data or you secure your data. That's where data DLP policy or data loss prevention comes into the place. That now you have identified the data. Now someone is trying to share that data outside your organization. What should happen to it? Would they be able to access it, and would they be able to share it outside? And then last but not the least comes the part of governing the data, right? Then comes the part, the governing the data is find out where is this DLP applied to, what sort of data classifiers are assigned to a particular documents, the auto labeling it is working or not. And when it comes to AI or Copilot would give you lots and lots of data based on the LLM. For an example, I need to find out what is going on with a project which is running with Nijar. I ask Copilot, hey, bring me all the important or key sensitive data on project Nijar, right? Now, Copilot would be able to bring that information back to me. But I, as an admin, I need to be sure that, all right, these person only have the access to this particular data. And that is when information barrier comes into process and into picture, wherein I need to be sure that, all right, only Steve and Heath has the access to it, and Harish and all the other employees do not have the access to it. So that is the most important part. Know your data, secure your data, govern your data, and protect it.
That brings up an interesting question that I think a lot of people have an assumption, and I'm not sure who wants to take this one, but the general assumption is when I give you access to the 365 tenant, I've already set up and established access rights. What is different is IT is not the only one setting up access rights now, right? 365 was designed as a collaboration platform. Microsoft made it really easy for all of us to collaborate together. So I can share data, whether it's a file or a folder or a team site with other colleagues in and out of my organization. But the thought process is, well, if I've shared that data, clearly there's an intention for it, it must be okay. And therefore, Copilot can only see that data that you have access to through the various mechanisms. But there seems to be an underlying bigger concern. Can one of you guys discuss how Copilot can expose data that is unintentional for the user to see, and what that use case kind of looks like?
So, yeah, Heath.
Go ahead.
Okay. So for an example, I've got two different users who wants to find out information regarding last year's project report, right? Now they do not want to include they just want to know what happened on the project. They do not need to have the access to the previous year's project financial detail, and then what we discussed with client and what were our SOWs and agreements with them, right? So, for an example, Steve is just an engineer who was working on the product, not a managing director, not a chairperson, no one from the management team. He does not need to know about the financial aspect of the project, right? Then he should only have the access to that particular project sites, project documents, what happened with the product, how was it developed, and what was the goal of it. And let's talk about, in a similar fashion, let's talk about Steve. Steve is from management. He's not from product. He does not have any idea. He has no idea what does the project do, but he interacts with the client, sell the product, and that's how it is important for him to find out what we discuss with the client, how did we deliver, whether it was delivered on time or not. So these kind of information segregates these two individuals. Now, let's talk about, you mentioned that Office 365 was designed as a collaboration tool, right? Absolutely right. And as an IT guy, I wouldn't have to sit on each and every document or each and every site, understanding that, all right, this document should be provided access to Steve, and this should not be provided access to Heath, right? For that purpose, security group was created. So basically, I can have three different sets of security group. The first security group would be employees only. The second security group is all employees. And the third security group is management only. Then I can give the access to that security group. Now, for an example, Heath is an employee, just an employee, and he has left the organization, and Kristen joined the organization on his account, right? I would just add Kristen to the security group, and voila, directly Kristen would have all the access, everything with Heath had. I wouldn't have to go on each document, each site by myself, sit all day around and give her each and every permission one by one. So that is how it would be easier for us to decide and give access and share the permission, collaborate with each other on the basis of proper hierarchy within our Office 365 environment. We can set up barriers, we can set up DLPs, we can share, we can do everything which is intended from Office 365 and still be capable of securing our data.
Is this
Absolutely.
something
You're
that
absolutely right.
do you want to add, comment?
No, I think you did a great job with it with that. I mean, that's absolutely right. I guess if I was going to add something, the only thing is that simple statement about that I mentioned earlier, right? Don't confuse the ability to share data with the ability to protect data. So as
Yeah,
we're creating those sharing links, as we're creating those teams, that that team could have lots of different data classified inside of it. You could have guests from the outside accessing a team that has highly confidential data in it. As long as that data is classified and labeled appropriately, those outside guests aren't going to be able to access it.
exactly.
Gotcha. And is that obviously larger organizations? This is a given. They have a documented written security policy that they can follow. A lot of small
Hopefully.
businesses don't. Yeah, well, yeah, that's true. Hopefully, right? Some don't, but most these days do. Definitely, if they're in a regulatory controlled space, a lot of small businesses don't. Is there guidance or advice to a small company that doesn't have the sophistication level? Maybe it's an admin that they have, or even the owner sometimes who has to address this. Should they even care about it?
Yeah, so
Yeah, they should
basically, if we
definitely
talk
care.
about yeah.
Go ahead. Go
So
ahead,
in
Aris.
for an example, if we are talking about a small law firm, right, or a small healthcare provider, even these people need to have the basic compliance which are set up, regulatory compliance policies which are set up. For a law firm, you will still need the to secure your data for any higher risk of data breaches, unauthorized access, data loss. They would need to set those policies in place so that their clients would also be secure that all right, this law firm I'm associated with secures my data and there would not be any probable leaks, right? Similarly, if we are talking about a healthcare provider, they need to comply with the regulations such as HIPAA compliance policy. These even if it is a mid firm or a small cap, they should ensure that the handling of the patient data meets the regulatory requirements, avoiding any hefty finance or legal issues, because that may come into a picture if the data has been leaked. Even if it is a small organization, they still deal with people, right? And PII information like SSN, any credit card information may lead to huge loss on the patient's part or on the client's part of that particular firm. And that is why it is mandatory for them to just be sure that what are the data which they are handling and whether that data is secured within their parameters or not.
Absolutely. And even going smaller scale than that, I have a really good friend of mine that runs a contracting business. He's got a total of 4 employees, one of which is an office person. The rest of the people are skilled people, tradesmen out doing things, right? They don't even they're not concerned at all about electronics, about data, about any of those things. And I was talking with him about this, and I'm like, so what happens tomorrow morning? You wake up and your data's gone. Oh, well, now his data means a lot to him, right? All of his invoicing
Yeah.
data for the last year is gone. All the pictures proving that he had delivered on his contracts is gone. All the pictures he had taken to help sell somebody and go, look, this wall has got some problems, and here's why. This roof has some problems. Here's why. Is gone, right? Now, all of a sudden, the data appears to be a lot more important. So, a lot of times when I'm talking with small business owners or people outside of that regulatory space, it's like, well, the reason those regulations exist is to help you protect the data, protect your customers' data that you are holding for them so that something bad doesn't happen to them. What happens if it's all gone? Or worse, what happens if you wake up tomorrow morning and it's all publicly available and all over the internet? That email that you wrote with that tone to your office manager that you didn't want your customer to see is wide open out there, right? That's the type of stuff that people have to think about when they're looking at this and going, why do I care about data classification? Why do I care about data security? Not just from a compliance point of view, because it's really what fuels every business nowadays, whether you think it is or not, right? It's what fuels every business.
And I guess with great power comes great responsibility. And as we're leveraging
Absolutely.
these tools, we have our clients' data on it, and it's our fiduciary duty to protect that, regardless of what the regulations are. So that's an interesting point you brought up. I guess I would end this conversation with the last question around we're seeing lots of organizations offer workshops, Copilot workshops, readiness assessments. Do you guys recommend those services? What does that experience look like for customers? I know we offer some of those services as well. Maybe you can talk about why that would be beneficial for all sizes of organizations.
Sure. Well, first off, usually the business doesn't really understand what it is they're trying to get themselves into, right? So the first step of this organization is really understanding the art of possible. Why would I want this technology? What could it do for me? And what does it mean to the current state of technology that I have? That statement, your current state, now that comes down to a readiness assessment. Where are you? One of the things I like to say all the time is, diagnosis without examination equals malpractice. That's exactly what that means, right? Hey, I've got a headache. We'll take a couple aspirin. I didn't ignore the fact that you had a brain tumor, right? So you want to make sure
Absolutely.
that you
So
have someone qualified come in, look at your systems, and go, this is where you need to be in order to take advantage of that. Now, what happens a lot of times is people get scared of that because they're like, well, you're going to come in and you're going to tell me I got to spend all this money on these other things. I talked earlier about the pyramid, that you really should have that zero trust, then threat defense, then talk about data governance. While that is built like that, you can have the quick hits along the way, right? Think of zero trust as the foundation of your house. If you ever built a house or know anybody who has, no one gets excited when the concrete has been poured. When the foundation has been laid, no one is excited about it at all. Everyone wants to get to the point where they're talking about the leather chairs, the size of the TV that's going on the wall, how many speakers are we going to have, well, how cool is the kitchen going to be, right? No one wants to talk about where the pipes in the walls are. Well, those first few steps are all about that foundation and building that structure so that you can properly support a TV on the wall. So you have a place to put the leather chairs without them getting wet. So the roof actually works properly, right? So those are the things you have to do. Now, you can do some of those things all in conjunction at the same time. You just have to build that program. One thing I stress a lot in most talks I give is this is just like everything else. This is not a project. This is an ongoing program. Yes, there may be a implementation project to get started, but then it's an ongoing program to properly manage this and keep it all working for you the right way.
Nizar, do you want to add anything on workshops that you've seen that's Microsoft is sponsoring these days?
Yes. So as always, Microsoft is our great vendor, but Microsoft is in the business of selling licenses. So there's obviously there's always this whole thing about, hey, here's Copilot licenses, 50 pack, 10 pack, enable it. So what we have seen is basically working through at least the preliminary analysis. And I think even small businesses, medium-sized businesses can benefit from that, to doing a very small analysis in terms of their data and how can it be exposed. And again, Copilot is a tool that is supposed to be grounding your data, meaning your Microsoft offers this commercial data protection. So you want to take advantage of all the tools that Microsoft already provides you to govern the data first before you enable this. So I think workshops are kind of critical. I've seen that in a lot of our customers requesting that.
It's a really interesting point, by the way, that you just brought up. And many people may not understand the difference because many people are aware of ChatGPT, and that's a public system. So anytime you use that or upload data to it, it now becomes publicly available. Where Microsoft's thing is, hey, if you're using Copilot, it stays within your organization. But there's an asterisk with that. That's only if you have proper data governance. Otherwise, you've
Exactly.
lost control
absolutely.
of that data, and other people will inadvertently see it in and out of your organization, depending on how it's being used by the end users. And so that's, I guess, at the end of the day, that's what we're trying to help customers and organizations understand how to protect themselves. I guess I actually have one last question. And Harish, maybe this is a good one for you, is what do you think the biggest mistake organizations make at the very beginning that hindsight would drive a different decision-making process?
As Heath mentioned very well, it is very important to have a strong base of the structure within Office 365, like the hierarchical structure, wherein the identities are kept where we want it to be kept, right? Basically, segregating employees, basically segregating critical resources, management, everything at one place. Then it is important for us to decide a roadmap for our data. We don't want the data to be kept forever, or we don't want to end up in a situation that after 10 years or 11 years of our existence, we run into a problem that we have consumed entire data, and now the emails are not coming in, we are not able to save anything in our SharePoint. So that is important for us to understand and to lay a proper roadmap of data as well, that after for 5 years the data would be secured. After that, 2 years the data would be put in archive state, and after that, because the data is not being used and on the basis of last modified date, it would be purged, right? That is important for us to do that. Then we have already discussed the how important it is for data governance. So uh, in my experience, I've worked with the clients wherein they come back and say that, hey, our Copilot is not giving us the expected results. Our DLP is leaking the data and we are getting a lots of alert. You are expected to get a lot of alerts. The reason is these policies are not set up right. You just bought the license and just enabled it. That's not how it works. It is important to do the groundwork. It is important to do set up the framework of any policy and then test it. How do you want it to work? And then only enable it, right? So that is the most important aspect of data governance of M365 administration.
Excellent session today. Wanted to thank all three of you guys for participating and educating myself and everyone else that might be watching this in some of the key areas of importance of deploying Copilot and other AI technologies. I think the thing that I take away from this is you have to start by understanding what you're trying to protect, what data is important, and what is your policy around that data. And if you've defined that on paper, then you can build systems around it pretty easily because all the technology exists. If you don't, then it ends up being somewhat of a free-for-all, and the outcome is going to be probably negative in unexpected ways because it wasn't thought
Yeah.
through from the beginning. So definitely thank you for all the comments. We'll end with that. Have a great day, gentlemen.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
Thank you so much.
Yes, great discussion, everyone. Thank you to Heath, Harish, Nizar, and Steve for your time and expertise today. We hope you enjoyed today's discussion and invite you to join us for the next episode in our cyber series on September 12th. If you like this episode, please share it with a colleague. We'll be sending a recording and a follow-up email, or you can share the website success.forthright.com/cyberseries. See you next time.